why not sit back, relax, and take things easy like a Sunday morn? I'm your host, Shane Lockwood, and this is episode 61. Today's date is the 29th of January 2017, and this is the first show for this year. I want to welcome everybody who is listening to this for the very first time, and I want to welcome back everybody who listens to each and every episode. It is very much appreciated. Now, there's quite a lot to go over in this particular show, so I'm going to try and keep it very, very tight. I'm not going to edit the show. There's not going to be music and things like that because I do want to get this episode up and out and back onto producing regular, frequent content. This particular episode is sponsored by Darren Close. That's DARREN space CLOSE, and he is the author and artist behind the comic Killeroo, KILLEROO, and Killeroo is a hybrid cross between a man and a kangaroo, and he has all sorts of adventures. He's a very, very gruff character, sometimes physically violent, sometimes not, but it's a very interesting read. There's a series of books, comic books, that are to do with this character, and there's another comic that Darren did last year called Struggle, and it's to do with the internal struggle that artists have when it comes to creating regular content, whether it's to do with self-doubt, dealing with criticism, and just the mental gymnastics that you have to do to create content. And I'm proud of the work of that particular comic because I get a mention at the very end of it because it was part of a 24-hour comic competition. The idea is to produce 24 pages of comic in 24 hours, and that's not easy. And this was there are different subcategories. So you can do 8 pages, or you can do 12 pages, or 24 pages, depending on which category you want to enter into. And I think this was either an 8-page or a 12-page comic. I can't remember. But as he was going along building the comic, he was uploading images and pages to Facebook, and I told him to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and he started to dig out a lot of the criticism and a lot of the garbage that he was holding on to, and it goes into the comic book so that when you read it, it allows you as the reader of the comic and as a content creator to actually kill, or at least turn the volume down on some of these inner demons that are preventing you from doing the best work that you can. Now, for me as a content creator, creating a podcast, I struggle a lot. It takes a lot of editing sometimes. Sometimes I will have to stop halfway through, and I could be, say, 20 minutes into a 30-minute podcast, not be happy with it, and then start the whole thing again. And little noises and things like that, little pop-ups that saying your Outlook account settings are out of date, and I don't care. But those things, normally if I was in a different frame of mind, I would let that annoy me and then go back to doing what I was doing, and I'd reset the podcast. But Darren is supporting this particular episode through Patreon, and I know some people have issues with Patreon, but I'll talk about that later on in this particular episode. But I want to talk about the upcoming Red Dwarf convention. Red Dwarf is a science fiction comedy. It's very anti-Star Trek, and it's nothing like Star Wars or anything like that. It's very British, A very different kind of science fiction, very gritty, but ultimately very human and very funny. Because the idea of the show is just was to have a comedy sort of set in space. Anyway, there are four of the actors, including Norman Lovett, who plays Holly, the ship's computer. He's coming over to Australia, and he'll be in, I think, Perth, Sydney, and Adelaide. I live in Adelaide, so I will be going to the Adelaide convention. I think tickets are $120 each, so it's not cheap, but it's worth going and looking up in your local capital city if they are in your neck of the woods. But they do travel around the world. I don't know about the United States because I don't think Red Dwarf is as popular in the United States, but I think if you can drum up enough interest, they might go over there. But Norman Lovett is doing a comedy show then I think the couple of nights before, and Craig Charles is doing a DJing set, playing R&B, techno music, and all that sort of stuff the night before. So I don't know how he's going to be bright and bushy-tailed for 9 a.m. on Saturday, February the 4th, which is the date of the convention. It goes from 9 a.m. to about 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's a full day event. So you are getting your money's worth. I think that I think it's $70 for children. It is still very expensive. I think there are VIP tickets which have sold out for the Adelaide event. Well, $500 each, but you can have breakfast with the celebrities, and you basically spend all day with them, finding out more about them and things like that. I always take the cheaper option because I think I can get more out of it through my own way. But I think it's something that I'm looking forward to. Get this year off with a brand new start, and I'm umming and ahhing. I do have lots to talk about, but I'm starting to digress, and I'm actually taking big chunks of time out of the podcast. It's nearly 8 minutes in, so we'll move on. How many New Year's resolutions have you failed already? How many did you set in the beginning of the year, and how many have you kept? I don't think you would have kept a whole lot this far into the year. And I know that most people don't have their mind straight until at least February, really, to get over the celebrations and whatnot, and getting your finances back on track, and so on and so forth. But I hear a lot of people saying that they're going to give up bread and carbs and potato chips and alcohol, chocolate, sugar, junk food, and all that as an all or nothing approach. And I think you set yourself up for failure when you do that, and it's never really a good idea to do that. What's better, and even with goals, I think goals are very often too big. I didn't achieve any of the goals that I set out to last year. I think last year was an aberration in many ways. There was just too many abnormalities in terms of things happening to me and to people around me, and it was just crazy. And in terms of celebrity deaths and things like that. But I think it's better to compare yourself this time of year with around this time last year. So for me, I was 120 kilos, and I am down to 105 kilos. So I've lost 15 kilos. Now, it took me 6 months to drop down to 15 kilos. Then I gained 10, and then I'm slowly coming back down again, upping and down. And it's just been a yo-yo at this point, largely because I'm studying, and it's meant that my focus in terms of exercise, because I was doing a lot of excessive walking. I was doing at least 7 kilometers to 10 kilometers a night to try and get this weight off. And that is excessive, I think, by even athletic standards. So there was a bout of bad weather and I couldn't go. We had torrential rains and things like that. So I couldn't, this was back in July, so I eased off a bit, and that started a snowball effect of being lazy and making excuses and things like that. And then it started to get hot, and then it was too hot. So, geez, and then there was hurricanes and cyclones and all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and then a myriad of excuses. My phone battery doesn't last very long. Oh, geez, it was just one thing after another. A gum tree branch fell and destroyed my fence, which is now fixed. It also destroyed my clothesline, which is not fixed. My hot water service blew up, which took several weeks to fix. And then recently I had the plasterer come out to fix the damage that the electrician did when the electrician took out the power board in order just to plug in the hot water service that the plumbers had put in. Oh my goodness, it was just a nightmare, right? I haven't even spoken to my father since September because I haven't had a spare moment because I'm studying a Certificate 3 in warehousing and distribution. So just have a day off, and I'm going to ring him tomorrow after my appointment with my case manager. Oh, geez, it's just go, go, go. All right, now I've got all of that out. I've advertised the Red Dwarf, promoted Darren Close, talked about New Year's resolutions. Oh, if you do have goals, make sure that they are really small and achievable. Make sure what you want to do is, rather than have a big goal like wanting to have a new computer or something like that, make sure you have smaller achievable goals that you can work towards every single week. And that's very fast and loose. You don't have to stress about it from day to day. Just maybe, okay, I might lose a kilogram or a couple of pounds of weight or a pound of weight or half a kilogram or something like that once a week. And if you're doing that, by the end of the year, you're going to be losing, say, anywhere between, say, 25 kilograms to 50 kilograms, depending on your weight and how much exercise you do and things like that. But slowly and steady. And when it comes to weight loss and things like that, do think long term. Don't think in terms of, I need to lose so much weight in 3 months, because one, it's impossible to do. It can be done, but you got to think long term, because it's in terms of sustainability and sustained effort. There's a lot of S's in that word. Persistent effort. I don't think that one's much better, but persistent effort with making things easier, modifying your diet just ever so slightly, maybe less junk, more vegetables, more fruit, a little bit more walking, maybe lifting some weights, only small weights at first, and maybe building them up over time like I did. That was the other thing. I started lifting. I'm up to about 15 kilos, but I also was listening to power lifters, and they give real advice rather than trying to sell you stuff. So what they were saying was that there isn't a linear progression when it comes to weights. You go up to a certain point and then you drop back down to your beginning weight and you go back up again, you see. And the reason they do that is because it doesn't confuse the muscle so much. It's so that you, in your mind, can go, oh, okay, yeah. Now lifting 5 kilograms is easy, right? Now you might think that's fairly light for you. But at the time, for me, starting out, it was heavy to lift 5 kilograms. And then if you're going to do bicep curls, you do start doing reps with them, then it starts to really, you're really making some effort. It's really doing some stuff to your body, changing it. Then as you go heavier and heavier and heavier, oh, okay, yeah. And then if you go back, you think, oh, hang on, these lighter weights aren't as heavy. That's when you know that you're actually making a progress and things like that. I started doing a 50 weeks, what was it called? 50 weeks to a new you, or 52 weeks to a better you, or something along those lines. I've forgotten because it's been that long. That comes, I think I've got another couple of months for those that asked about that. I think it ends in May, I think May 24th, 2017. And then I will compare my progress. This, I mentioned the Red Dwarf Convention, and I do want to shed a few pounds, a few kilograms before that happens. I don't know what I can do in the space of a week, or from say Monday until Saturday, but it definitely means that there's going to be at least no junk at least. I'm just going to go straight vegetables, I think, for the next week, and maybe kick up my exercise regime a bit, get back into doing 5k walking, not to an excessive level, but just enough to get my body metabolism kicking over. So I'm actually looking my best. I've looked at some earlier photos of me with various celebrities and things, and I just didn't look very, very good. I had a double chin with a photo of me with what's her name, Felicia Day. It's a great photo. She looked fantastic. Still had the long red hair and everything. She's cut it short since, but and apparently she gave birth, or she was at least very heavily pregnant a few weeks back. So I will have to look into that to find out whether she's had a girl or a boy, or what the story was with that. There's a whole heap of TV shows and comic books and stuff that I was going to talk about. There's a new Jessica Jones comic, and it's set after the TV series. Now, the original Jessica Jones comic, I think, was called Alias, and you may need to correct me on this one. It was called Alias, and that turned into a TV show. Then, I think, of the same name. Then it became Jessica Jones, the TV show, and then the new comic, Jessica Jones, is set after the events of the TV show, where she fell pregnant to Luke Cage, and so she's had a daughter. So, excuse the cough again. But yeah, so that's something worth picking up. I've yet to actually sit down and read it. I've got 3 issues that I do need to go over. There's a Deadpool versus Spider-Man running series that's up to issue 13 now, which I have to sit down and go over. It's very, very funny. Deadpool, if you don't know, starred in his own movie earlier in 2016, and it was one of the best movies of the year. It was beaten, in my opinion, by a movie called Hunt of the Wilder People, which is a brilliant, hilarious movie that you need to see immediately. It's a very heartwarming but also tear-jerking movie at the same time. Very, very funny. Shot and set in New Zealand, but absolutely brilliant. It's got Sam Neill and a few other brilliant actors in it. And the director of that movie is doing Thor Ragnarok, which is the 3rd Thor movie, the Marvel movie character Thor, the Norse god of thunder. And it also has the Incredible Hulk in it. And there's apparently a scene, no spoilers, where they actually fight each other. So that should be very, very interesting. But Deadpool started in his own movie. He's played by Ryan Reynolds. That movie is very, very funny as well. Very adults only. It did get an R rating, and it needed an R rating, I think, because of the blood and guts and the nature of some of the humour and the jokes. There's a sex scene as well in it, which is part of a joke. What else have I been reading? Oh, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. I've got a couple of issues behind in that one. Oh, look, I've got an issue of Killeroo here. It's Killeroo, The Stones of Karan Chirinja. Gee, though, I messed that pronunciation up pretty bad. But this one, he deals with Aboriginal spirituality. Absolutely brilliant comic. Mentioned by, I think I mentioned Darren Close at the beginning. I did, yes, I did. Also, 20 minutes in. Okay, I'll talk about Patreon, and because I'm talking about Darren. Bloody hell, this thing's annoying me. Pop-ups. Patreon is a fan funding method. For those of you who are content creators or you want to support a content creator in doing whatever it is that they want to do, and you know that they don't have the money to be able to create what they want to do on a regular basis, like me with this particular podcast. And some people have a really bad idea of what Patreon is, or they have an idea, they have an aversion to asking people for money for their podcasts and things like that. But my intention, and complete transparency here, I've said repeatedly that storage space costs money. This takes time and effort. I started recording this at about 7:30 and it's now 11:30 because I've had to stop, start, re-record, stop, start, re-record, and that's not without any particular editing either. So I'm not going to edit this. I'm not going to put any sound effects or music or any relaxing stuff like that because I've rambled on. I didn't even tell people what the purpose of this particular podcast or what I do here, and it's 20 minutes in. But Patreon allows fans to support their favorite creators. Now, initially, it was a monthly payment, and I wasn't producing enough content I couldn't guarantee at least a monthly episode of a podcast because of the stuff that was going on, technical issues, computers dying, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So it would have been a rip-off to ask people to pay a monthly fee and not get content. But there's a second option. And the second option is that I charge a per episode donation. Now, these episodes will always be free. If you like the show, it's free, okay? Whether you go through YouTube, whether you go through other places to find this podcast, it's free, okay? What you're paying for is earlier episodes, like the Patreon supporters get this episode earlier, and I may, depending on what kind of support that I get, produce additional content. The problem is it takes hours to produce a 30-minute podcast, especially if I'm going to be adding in music and making sure that it's mixed right so that the music doesn't overpower my voice. And in the early days of this podcast, I used to interview people. You may remember that. And you may be listening to this thinking, it's been a while since Shane interviewed me. And that's because I don't have the technology to be able to record a podcast and use Skype at the same time. It's just as simple as that. Money can change these things. But my focus was never on money, despite what you may hear from certain sectors of the community, rather disgruntled wealthy people, who think that asking for a single dollar is a dollar too much. But how much of this is worth my time? Really, it takes a long time. What you might not be aware of is not just the editing involved in adding music to a podcast and mixing the volumes and making sure that the music doesn't go over my voice and you can hear me clearly and things like that. Music choices. I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about the fact that you're only hearing the final product of something that I have recorded halfway through, stopped, deleted the recording, re-recorded, started again, and done this over and over and over again until I personally was happy. There's a lot of perfectionism, which goes back to Darren's struggle comic, the self-criticism, the self-doubt, and things like that, worrying about what other people would think, worrying about the criticism and whatnot. Is this worth charging people $1 for? And I think it is. I think that every podcast is worth charging $1 for. There are a lot of people who, for example, there are podcasts like Radio Lab, and that's not on YouTube, I don't think, but it's worth checking out. It's a very highly polished, some would say over polished and overproduced podcast with interviews and sound effects, and there's a lot of money that was poured into that particular podcast. There are other people who are part of a podcast community that they have money to begin with, right? So podcasting once a month, once a week, or whenever they want to get together is sort of like a bit of a hangout, bit of a fun thing that they want to do, and it's a bit of very free form. They record it once and that's it. And there's a very community-minded group of people, and the idea of charging people money to listen to a podcast is an aberration to them, right? So I get that as well. I understand where people are coming from. They don't like the idea of asking for funding and things like that, but they are comfortable in their income level, whereas I am not. I'm not in a position to be able to produce the best content at a regular pace that I want to, where it's fun for me and then it's fun for you and things like that. So I hope that I've forgotten whether I actually mentioned that this is supposed to be a rather relaxing podcast. It's not about trying to sell you on anything. If you do want to throw a few dollars into the hat, then fine, fair enough. That's all it is. There's no pressure to do that, right? This will always be free to listen to. If you wish to help me upgrade the equipment that I need to be able to do this on a regular basis, and just to show some support, even if for free, you can do this now on whatever format that you are listening to this podcast. Click like, click a thumb up, or click a love heart, or whatever it is. Share it with your friends. Tell them that this podcast is available, and that's absolutely free. It's a free way of supporting this podcast. Do you want me to produce more content? Do you want me to produce regular content? I have to make sure that people see this as a serious thing. Anyway, I hope that today and the rest of the week is easy like a Sunday morn. I'm coming up to 30 minutes, and I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. I hate mentioning money, and I'm not desperate for it, but it just helps out. And that's the breaks. A lot of podcasts will die from lack of funding. Go through your aggregator, look at the dates of the last podcasts in Adelaide, for example. Most of them are dead because of lack of funding, lack of interest, lack of fan support. Fan support can be free. Like I said, click like, share it, tell your friends and whatnot. Anyway, that's all for me today. Look after yourselves and bye for now.